Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get right into this. We are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating. So, if you enjoy the shows, the information, the discussions, the lectures, the revelations, and the guests and the hosts on the other shows on the network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the libertyworksradionetwork.com and get signed up as a monthly subscribing member. Even if it's as little as $15, $20 a month, every membership helps, and we do need your support to keep the broadcast network operating. And of course, if you want to get fully educated and fully informed on the maladministration of the federal income tax by the Internal Revenue Service, the Department of Justice, and the federal judges, you want to head right over to tax-freedom.com. That's tax freedom with a hyphen. Taxfreedom.com. And get informed, because the income tax is a constitutional fraud. It has been for 50 years, and the Supreme Court has exposed it. It's just a matter of time till the rest of you wake up to what I've been teaching for 30 years. The judges are lying to you, straight up lying to you. There is no tax system in the United States. It's a system of involuntary servitude and near virtual indentured servitude, where all the money taken from the paychecks of the American people does not go to the United States Treasury, as required by law, of all collected quote-unquote tax. But since it's not tax, it doesn't go in the Treasury. It goes to the Federal Reserve Bank, a private corporation. Why is a private corporation cashing and getting your so-called tax dollars instead of the U.S. Treasury? It's because there is no tax imposed. There's no constitutional power to tax the American people's labor. The federal judges have been lying about that since 1955 and enforcing communism, the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, in place of constitutional taxation. That's where you find, in the Communist Manifesto, in the second plank, that's where you find graduated taxation of income. Divide the population into different classes, treat them differently with non-uniform law, and set them to warfare in the streets against one another in a system of class warfare that destroys representative government. Because once you have a class warfare system, no politician can ever choose to represent the whole of the American people, unless they're a very unusual politician who hasn't been a politician for their entire life, like Donald Trump, who's the only person working for the American people instead of the party. It's become a party system that assumes the American people will have to support one or the other, and therefore they don't have to be responsible to anyone except their own agenda. And of course, we saw that during the Biden term for 4.5 years, didn't we? We sure did. Okay, let's talk about what's happening in the news. We are entering the second week of government shutdown, which is basically being caused by the Democrats under Schumer in the Senate, their refusal to sign a clean CR. A CR is a continuing resolution, and a clean CR means they don't change the budget numbers at all. They don't add anything, they don't take anything away. They extend the existing budget to be in place for another 4 to 6 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, to give them time to work out a final budget. And this method of when parties are divided and it comes time to do the budget and passing a CR has been pretty routine for 30 years. Both parties occasionally object. Both parties occasionally let the government shut down for a little while. But ultimately, you come to the table and either work out a complete budget, which is rare, or they come to the table and decide to extend the existing numbers without alteration. And the Democrats refuse to do that. They absolutely insist on getting $1.4 trillion to prevent the Obamacare subsidies from ending at the end of this year. Now, that is exactly the kind of budget item that is worked out later on. It's not made part of a CR because it's too controversial to change the numbers by that much. So historically, eventually, the parties sign a CR and then they sit down and figure out the numbers and figure out a full budget. But the Democrats this time refused to sign a continuing resolution because when Schumer did it back in March or April, when it came up the first time, they signed a CR to continue things to figure it out. And his far left wing in the Democrat Party went crazy. And he's now afraid of being primaried by AOC, who will replace him in the Senate in New York, he thinks. And therefore, he's become a wall. He doesn't want to sign a CR. He wants to at least put on a show, it would appear, an appearance of resisting Trump's policies. But Trump's policies aren't in a CR. This is a continuing resolution of what was already established beforehand without implementing anybody's policies any further than they already exist today. So you're shut down. It's ongoing. Doesn't appear to be any time. And of course, as I spoke about extensively last week, I think Trump should use this opportunity to shrink the federal government. We cannot allow the federal deficit to continue running at $2 trillion a year. You're at 37.5, headed for 40. We need to stop this. As goes the currency, so goes the fate of the nation and the quality of life of its people. If you let your currency deteriorate, you will be ruined. You will be ruined. We have to shrink the federal government. We have to remove some of their power. We have to share some of the economic power they have a monopoly on with the state legislatures. It's the states that are supposed to be doing agriculture, education, energy, commerce, labor, housing, environment, occupational safety, transportation. These are all state functions, not federal. And we can take this opportunity to eliminate all those unconstitutional federal agencies that never should have been started in the first place, cut their collective budget by 10%, and distribute it to the states. The federal government gets smaller, the debt gets smaller, and you continue this process, cutting the state funds 10% and the whole federal budget 5% until you balance the budget. It'll only take a couple of years with a sincere Congress, and you'll have shrunk the government, shrunk the deficit, shrunk the amount that it grows each year, and passed economic power to the states who will be spending the money, their share, their proportionate share under the census. They'll be spending their money out of their capital in their state. So the economy will be triggered in every single state where the monies are spent, instead of just in and only around Washington, D.C., where the lobbyists, the contractors, and the congressmen are getting wealthy, selling out the American people. Because the states don't have access to the funds necessary to manage areas like energy, agriculture, education, so forth and so on. So share some of that monopolistic economic power that is destroying the currency through stupidity of Congress and the endless borrowing and reckless spending. You need the means test your Social Security and welfare systems to stop that nonsense. And of course, you need to replace the federal income tax, which has enslaved the American people and allowed the corporate subjects to escape taxation almost entirely. We need to terminate the income tax. Taxing profit is communistic. It discourages work and it encourages lying. It encourages companies and motivates companies to have no profits to avoid tax. And that breaks the link between Main Street and Wall Street, because if Main Street just thinks Wall Street is an accounting house that's gaming the books to avoid tax, Well, who wants to invest in that piece of crap if it doesn't pay any dividends and it's just a shell accounting game? So you need to make the companies go back to honest accounting and tax not their profits at 20 to 40%, but their revenues. No deductions, no exemptions, no losses, no costs. Every single penny earned, every single month, 5% straight to the federal government on a quarterly basis, just like the withholding now. 5% of every dollar the company makes should go to the government, not 30 or 40% of every dollar the American citizen makes. This is insane. The founding fathers would have been absolutely aghast to hear that we've devolved to the point where every time an American earns a dollar, he owes a piece of it to the federal government. This is abject slavery, indentured servitude. It's criminal. And the judges are the ones who've been doing it to you. So we've got this opportunity with the government shut down and Democrats' refusal to sign a clean CR. Trump has an opportunity to shrink the government permanently, get rid of these agencies, move the power, the monetary power and the spending power to the state capitals, shrink the government. Shrink the government. If you don't shrink the government, we're going bankrupt. You can't keep printing money and running it out into oblivion. At some point, you break the back of the camel. You know, the straw that breaks the camel's back, that last little bit, who knows when it comes? No man may know the day of his coming or the hour. Okay, so you got the government shutdown, no CR, and all hell breaking loose. On the other hand, you've just got information that Trump has created a peace treaty between Hamas and Israel. The war in Gaza apparently is going to end, and the hostages are going to be released. Now, you know, this, if it plays out, great. It puts Trump on the map for the Nobel Peace Prize because nobody else could deal with this. And he was the one that brought the parties to the table and managed to convince both sides to do something, or there would be hell to pay, so to speak. So Trump has apparently, created a peace treaty, and I'm sorry to be a naysayer, but I think we've seen this before. You know, every time Hamas gets driven to the brink, oh, they come to the table. Now they want to talk, and then for 3 to 6 months, while they reorganize and reestablish themselves, nothing happens, and then after a little while, they go right back to doing what they've been doing all along. So we'll have to see how this plays out. I don't know what they're going to do in Gaza with respect to the Hamas presence. They've been working very hard to completely eradicate it. That's what they've been trying to do, is go after the Hamas members and leaders to eradicate the organization. And they've been successful, which is why Hamas has decided to come to the table. The ones that are left don't want to get eradicated. So they're agreeing to this treaty, and after 2 years, going to release some hostages and a number of dead bodies, because, of course, they didn't all survive. So Trump has done that. In conjunction with that, it looks like you might see some expansion of the Abraham Accords, includes Syria, Saudi Arabia, and some others. And that, of course, would again put him on the map for the Nobel Peace Prize. And if he can get Ukraine and Russia to stop fighting, and of course, Putin just is. Okay, we're coming up on the first commercial break. We'll be back in 5 with more. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. Get on over to libertyworksradionetwork.com and get tuned in, and tell friends, relatives, neighbors, and friends to listen in and get informed. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and let's just get right back into our discussions. And it's becoming more and more clear from the news stories coming out every day that Joe Biden should never have been president. The Democrats, he, and the mainstream media lied to steal that election with fraud, conspiracy to commit coup to remove a sitting administration. It's all coming out. The Russia nonsense that was made up by Hillary to cover up her email crimes of breaking a server and keeping emails outside of a secure environment and then destroying all of the hard drives in their devices so they couldn't be tracked. All criminal. And they made up the Russiagate. They knew it was fake. They knew it was a lie. And yet Comey orchestrated with Brennan and Clapper at the top to have the 51 intelligence agents swear that the laptop was fraud. That was all true too. Hunter was taking money in Ukraine. Ukrainians were concerned about Biden corruption in their country and Burisma and withholding money. That was all withheld by the mainstream media. The FBI, Comey sicking the FBI on the administration, General Flynn, Navarro, Carter Page, Roger, no, I forget his last name. They put them all in prison. Contempt of Congress, not showing up. They put them all in prison, not because they committed any crime, but because they were Republicans who supported Trump. And of course, they made up all the criminal charges against Trump. Every single bit of this is all fiction and made up, and it's all coming out. Fake trials, fake criminal indictments without crimes being identified, fake trials without charges being identified, and of course that huge judgment in New York has already been thrown out as being completely unconstitutional. And today we hear that Letitia James has been indicted for, surprise, exactly what she falsely accused Donald Trump of doing: mortgage fraud. Lying on mortgage applications and fraudulently claiming a different residence, primary residence, than she actually had in order to get a better interest rate. It's all crime. She's the one committing the crimes, not Trump. Trump's valuation of the Mar-a-Lago property was not a problem, was not a crime, neither criminal nor a civil offense. The bank testified, we got no problem, it was a good loan, he paid it all back, we'd do it again. Oh, but no, Letitia James says it's only worth $18 million, got to put you away and take, what, $500 million from you? Absolutely corrupt, dirty Democrat. Everything about Biden and Democrats and the mainstream media was dirty corruption for 4 years. Nothing but lies and fraud fed to the American people knowingly. They did this to get Donald Trump out of office and to attack him and make it difficult for him to operate while he was in office. And they lied about everything. Biden was incompetent and dementia-ridden from day one. Just like I told you on day one, back when he started and couldn't talk to anyone, ever. What a fraud. All perpetrated by the Democrat Party, who covered up his dementia, and the mainstream media, who didn't even bother to ask questions about anything except the flavor of ice cream he happened to get that day. Oh my God. Every single bit of it was crime. Every single bit of it. And it comes out they wiretapped 8 sitting senators, the FBI. Why'd they do that? Did they identify some criminal conspiracy that the 8 senators had gotten themselves involved with? No, they didn't. There was no crime. They tapped them because they were part of the conservative political leadership, the team that supported Trump. They tapped them because they were political opposition. This is the FBI. This is the FBI. Comey and Wray should both be put in prison. Both be put in prison. They wiretapped 8 sitting senators because of the political party they were affiliated with, not because of any act, action, or plan or discussion that would approach anything close to a criminal enterprise. No, there was no crime, there's no enterprise, no conspiracy. They were just Republicans. Wiretap them. We got away with it with Trump, we can do it again. And they did. We need accountability. We need accountability for everything. Mayorkas should be going to prison for letting in 16 million illegal aliens. Criminals, cartels, gangs, dismantling the wall, opening the door, aiding and abetting 10 million. I think that's 10 million years in prison. 1 year for each person. And of course, Brennan and Clapper should be in prison, making up the Russiagate, propagating it, and sponsoring 51 signatures to lie about Hunter's laptop, which we all knew was true. Every single picture on that was undeniable. And the emails indicted him for selling access and peddling influence. Access to his father's office as vice president, who actively intervened in the Ukraine and bragged about it on stage, about they wouldn't get their $1 billion in financial aid if they didn't call off and terminate the prosecutor investigating Burisma. And what happened? They called off the prosecutor. Total corruption. Biden was a corrupt piece of crap right from the beginning. And his whole administration was taken over by a cabal inside the White House, as far left extremists. And that's why you got inflation, because they attacked the price of energy by jacking up the price of oil, by shutting down the pipeline, killing the leases, and discouraging drilling and production on the first day in office with executive orders. And it only took 6 months for the oil companies to react to that, and for the oil markets to react to that, and drive the price of oil to like 90, 100. And that drove up the price of gas, that drove up the price of energy, and that drove up the price of everything in our markets today, on every store shelf in the country. All done intentionally in the name of clean energy. Oh, it's more important to put up windmills and solar panels that don't work and have huge capital costs that we can give to our buddy partners over there doing the work, only for them to walk away a year later, like in Solyndra, or 15 years later, like with the windmills, when it turns out the 30-year amortization plans don't work. Lifetime's only 20 years. Not worth it with the capital expenditure every 20 years. And it was only financially viable on a 30-year amortization plan. If the equipment doesn't last 30 years, the whole plan goes to crap. And that's what's happening. And that's why the price of energy has gone up instead of down. And of course, as soon as Trump got into office, he reversed that. The price of oil is now less than $62. And inflation is 2.92%, less than 3% in 6 months, all based on sound economic policy and sound energy policy, not insane energy policy and reckless spending. Billions and billions of dollars went to buy votes of illegal aliens who can't vote, but who have been moved in to become new Democratic voters, dependent upon Democrat largesse and spending because they can't survive here on their own. They were brought here to buy votes, to become new voters for the Democrat Party, since the Democrats' insanity is losing the support of the American people. We got to find new voters. The black voters are rejecting us. The Latino voters are rejecting us. How can we replace the lost demographic? Oh, I know. Let's bring in people from all over the world to the southern border, put them on the dole, and tell them, don't forget to vote Democrat. And then move them to states where they're allowed to vote in state elections: New York, California, Oregon, Illinois. And that way, when they get counted in the census, illegal aliens in blue states will get more congressional representative and more budget dollars they're entitled, because they shouldn't be counting illegal aliens. They're not supposed to be getting representation. So if you count them in the census, you can't count them as Americans affecting the census. They shouldn't be given representation. The state shouldn't get a larger share of representation. Illinois, California, New York, they would be losing House seats and electoral college seats because people are moving out to move to Texas, Florida, Idaho, and other conservative states that don't destroy business and basically don't have an income tax. They'll let you keep what you earn because it's yours by right. The federal government doesn't recognize that, and of course the blue states piggyback. Every state has piggybacked the federal income tax. Practically every single state code I've looked at has based its tax on the federal tax, specifically gross income or adjusted gross income, which I've explained many times before, dates to original legislation of tax treaties. They don't date to any original domestic legislation. Section 61 was adopted not in 1913 as part of the original income tax laws, but 5 years later in 1918 as part of a Canadian tax treaty. It has never had domestic application. The Supreme Court got this wrong in Glenshaw Glass in 1955 when they ruled that Section 61 is Congress exercising its power to tax all accessions to wealth. All accessions to wealth. Where would that power come from? That doesn't sound like an impost on foreign activity, or a duty on exported goods, or an excise on the corporate person, the licensed person, or ATF, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and other commodities. How do you get to all accessions to wealth as a power to tax in the 50 states by the federal government? How do you get there? Oh, I know. You make up a new power to tax directly and without limitation under the 16th Amendment, which is basically what the court assumed in Glenshaw Glass. And that's the case that has overturned and upset the entire tax system and allowed the circuit court since 1980 to rule it is indeed a non-apportioned direct tax under authority of the 16th Amendment, which is the constitutional fraud that has been perpetrated on the American people for 50 years. Actively perpetrated by the judges for 50 years. There is no direct tax. There is no unlimited taxation. The Supreme Court said so 1 year ago in Moore et Ux v. United States. You want to read about it, learn about it, go here, taxfreedom.com, tax-freedom.com. Read about how they changed the law in 2018 under Trump, how they changed the constitutional authority, or actually didn't change it. They reasserted it as Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, which exposes the false claim of the last 50 years that it's the 16th Amendment and a new power to tax directly and without limitation. That's a fraud, that's a lie, that's communism, and that's what the judges have been doing to you. Communism. Not constitutional taxation. The liberal infestation and infection has gone deeper than just the Democratic Party. It's seeped into the judiciary. We'll be back in 5 with more. This is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. And let's just get right back into this. I got one more item here that I wanted to talk about, and that is, of course, the economy, which is, well, it depends. If you're on Wall Street, it's booming. If you're on Main Street, it's a little less sure, right? I mean, the job numbers came in and they said they took 2 million jobs away from Biden's last 2 years in office. So things down on Main Street weren't going so well under Joe and the Democrats, where the interest rate was up around 7% for mortgages. The inflation rate was up around 9% for food, and the American people were getting wiped out by the rising costs of goods due to inflation, while all the excess printed money was parked on the sidelines at Wall Street waiting for a buy-in opportunity on the stock market. And of course, that means the stock market has been propped up and is still being propped up by what is literally, I believe, still $7 trillion sitting on the sidelines. That's in money market accounts waiting for a buy-in opportunity because people have been afraid to deploy the market as it reaches a new high every week here for the last 4 or 5 weeks. All three markets over on Wall Street are just booming. You got the S&P up around, 6,700. The Dow Jones was at 47. It's now at 46.3. It's come off just a little bit. And I said the S&P was 6,700. And NASDAQ is at 23,000. So these are all three at near all-time highs. The Magnificent Seven, the tech stocks, and the AI are still running and still look to run further as their earnings get better. And more companies have to move to AI to stay competitive. So the companies providing the AI infrastructure are doing very well. And as I said, the market's at all-time highs. And on Main Street, again, it's a little trickier. Even though inflation is down below 3%, and oil is less than 62, which means you can anticipate gas prices and energy prices going even lower. And, it's just unfortunate that when the inflation rate comes down, all of the price increases that went up with inflation do not also come down. You get some price reductions, but you never get everything back that inflation took. Everything will always be a little bit more expensive. And as long as the government is recklessly printing debt as the mechanism to fund its insane and reckless spending on stupid crap that government shouldn't be involved in, like windmills and solar panels, and housing and subsidizing 10 million illegal aliens. So, you got the government, the Democrats, trying to destroy the currency as fast as they can, because, of course, what they want is a revolution. It's clear. The far left wing of the Democrats, the socialists, Antifa, the rioters, the anarchists, the insurrectionists, the reckless, violent wings of the Democratic Party are trying to institute a revolution to replace the constitutional republic with a pure socialist democracy like they have in Europe. And the problem with that, of course, is that in a democracy, 51% of the population can vote 49% back into slavery. And in a constitutional republic, the minority is protected from the majority. The Democrats want a democracy because they know that, partnered with the media, they can always create the appearance of a popular majority behind any issue they want. I mean, look at the last 4 years. They were able to create, for a little while, the appearance of a popular majority for all of the insane LGBTQ nonsense. Pronouns and girls are boys and boys are girls, and let's let them compete. Well, it doesn't matter that the boys are winning, they're girls. This is just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. And that kind of insanity, denial of reality, leads to chaos and anarchy in the streets and in events, which is what we saw. And they're hoping eventually to create so much anarchy and chaos that they can argue, look, the government's not working, we need to replace it. Vote in the socialist democracy. We need a new constitution. And look, here we have one all drafted for you. Step right up and vote. And you can bet the new government won't be about your rights. It'll be about their power based on taking your property in what is prohibited by the Constitution in a direct tax. And this is the key to taking back America, our freedom, and our politicians, is for everyone in the country to wake up to the fact that the income tax is a fraud. It has been enforced as a direct tax rather than an indirect tax. And I've had people say, well, what does that mean? What's the difference? They explain this in the Supreme Court decision of Moore. This is why you should go read it. It's on the taxfreedom.com website right here, tax-freedom.com. You need to go over there and read about the Moore decision, because in the Moore decision, the Supreme Court explained what the difference is. It explained that indirect taxes are taxes on activities and transactions that are subject to the payment of an indirect impost, duty, or excise. Activities or transactions like buying alcohol, tobacco, firearms, or conducting one's activities as a corporation or a licensed person or in a foreign place like a territory or possession or a foreign country under tax treaty. Imposts tax foreign activity. If there's no foreign activity, there's no income to tax. Duties tax exported goods. If there's no revenue from exported goods, there's no income to tax. Excises tax commodities, licenses, and corporations. If there's no revenue derived from ATF or petroleum fuels, licenses, or corporate person, there's no income to tax. Indirect taxes are also classically implemented in the law in a manner that makes it possible to shift the burden or completely avoid the tax. For instance, if you don't want to pay the indirect excise on alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, don't go to the store and buy it. You don't buy the goods, you don't have to pay the tax. You can avoid it. Another mechanism for avoiding tax is for the law to implement the tax through a collection at the source, like a sales tax, where it's the store that collects the tax from customers who can avoid the tax. They don't have to go to the store and buy the goods. They can stay at home, grow their own vegetables, raise their own, slaughter their own beef, cattle, and pork. And hell, you can drill in your own backyard for gas and oil. I don't recommend it unless you live in Oklahoma, but you can try. You can avoid the tax. You don't have to pay it. But they go to the store, they buy the goods, they ring it up at the cash register. There's no complaint. There's no there with a gun saying pay the tax. It's a voluntary transaction. The customer pays the tax. The store segregates the tax dollars collected, and it is the taxpayer because it is the party made liable by law for the payment of the tax collected. The customer isn't even the taxpayer. They think they are because the money to pay the tax comes out of their pocket. But they are not the taxpayer because the taxpayer is the tax collector, the store, who never pays a dime out of his own pocket. He only turns over what he's collected voluntarily from the transactions in his stores. So the tax is indirect because it can be avoided or because the burden is shifted from one party to the other so that the party that actually pays the tax into the treasury isn't paying the tax out of its own pocket, but only turning over money collected as tax from other parties and persons. And if you look at the income tax, that's exactly what we find. The original income tax legislation is not a direct tax. It's an indirect tax collected by withholding agents defined in law. at 7701A16 who are only authorized and required to collect money by withholding money as tax from payments made to non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. It was a tariff, the Underwood-Simmons Tariff Act of October 3rd, 1913. It's an indirect tax that collects money from the earnings of foreign persons who the Constitution gives authority over to the federal government, even in the 50 states. It doesn't give authority over citizens in the 50 states, which is why withholding agents aren't allowed to collect tax from citizens. And this was the only authority in law to collect tax, income tax, from 1913 to 1945. Well, 1942 when they started the victory tax, which was an unconstitutional form of the tax on the labor. But the original tax didn't touch Americans. That didn't happen until 1945 when they put in place the same indirect system of tax collection at the source, where it was the employers who the focus of the law is now on as the tax collector, who collect tax from employees and turn in the money they've collected from other persons. The employee isn't made liable, the same way the original income tax law of 1913 didn't make non-resident aliens liable. It only made the collector liable for what he collected, and so too does the employment law. So you have no application of the indirect taxing powers to the American people in the 50 states, not to their interest, to their dividends, their salaries, their wages, their alimony, their annuities, their tips, their social, none of it is taxable to the federal government. It's all a fraud. So direct taxes, on the other hand, are unavoidable. Direct taxes are taxes on persons or property or the activities of a person, like revenue, that are unavoidable, which is how the federal government has been enforcing the law. You earn money, you owe tax. It's unavoidable and you're responsible as the wage earner. This is unconstitutional direct taxation. It's not constitutional indirect taxation. It is unconstitutional direct taxation. And the Supreme Court said 1 year ago and more, income taxes are indirect taxes under Article 1, Section 8. Well, that means that what the government has been doing for 50 years in the circuit courts under precedents out of the circuits, and for 70 years after the Glenshaw Glass decision in 55 by the Supreme Court, which didn't actually say it's a direct tax under the 16th Amendment, they just inferred it by claiming Section 61 allowed Congress to tax all accessions to wealth. And the only possible source of a foundation to tax all accessions to wealth would be allegedly a direct tax under the 16th Amendment, which the Supreme Court rejected in 1916 in the original decisions of Brushaber and Stanton v. Baltic Mining, and which they reaffirmed 23 years later in Stewart Machine in 1937, and which they have now reaffirmed again in Moore in 2024, after Trump changed the tax law and the constitutional authority statement on the congressional record specifically says Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. But gross income isn't a basis for indirect taxation under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Gross income under Section 61 is not a basis for taxation by impost, unless it's earned in a foreign possession or territory, or in Canada between 1918 and 1993. Gross income isn't the basis for taxing by duty exported goods. You have to have exported goods, and then you have income to measure. And gross income isn't the basis for taxation by excise. It's corporate, commodity, or license. If you don't have the impost or the duty or the excise, gross income, your sources of earnings in the 50 states are 100% irrelevant to constitutional taxation. This is the fraud that's been perpetrated by the Supreme Court, the same court that gave us Korematsu and Chevron. It's the Supreme Court of the 50s and the 60s, the liberal pigs that converted the system from one of constitutional taxation to communist socialism and the second plank, the direct control and rule of the American people. And it's the judges that burned the Constitution, and this Supreme Court seems to be trying to bring it back. We'll be back next week with more.